Good evening, everyone. I think you're in for a treat tonight. If you wanted to be here till breakfast, I could go over Dr. Tom's entire bio, but maybe we'll shorten it just a tad. He's a member of the United Nations Association Board of Directors here in San Diego County and a key person in creation as a creation care educator for the Presbyterian Church. He's one of the top climate reality project speakers. Tonight, he'll be using in part or building on the MIT En-ROADS Climate Simulator, which is a wonderful tool. Tom is an advisor to the Samuel Lawrence Foundation, deeply involved in nuclear waste. In his recent past, he was an advisor to the White House as a science advisor on nuclear waste issues and has made multiple presentations at the White House. He's involved in the United Nations Association of Orange County, a witness, editor of a book, Witness for the Earth, Coalescing the Religious Environmental Movement. He's past president of the Coalition for Clean Air, deeply involved in California's Clean Air Act, microelectronics, the San Diego chapter of Reasons to Believe. He's on the board of the World Stewardship Institute. He's also has received a Life Achievement Award from the Presbyterian Association of Science, Technology, and the Christian Faith. We know Dr. Tom as one of the founders of NCCCA. So he comes to this presentation with, huge, honest credentials and having worked, with Dr. Tom for a bunch of years now in a variety of projects, I am honored to call him a friend and a mentor, and I think we'll be pretty excited about what we hear tonight. Dr. Tom, over to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks. I'll get everything set up here. Hang on. Okay, I think we're all set here. Good evening. Nice to see all of you folks. Haven't seen some of you for a long time. Um, I'm very, very curious about climate change and giant environmental problems in general. And I was taken by the amount of gloom and doom that seems to be prevalent whenever you say the words climate change. Various people that I know in San Diego and across the country, across the world, they all seem to be feeling a sense of doom and gloom. So I decided it would be a good idea to spend some time looking at the whole situation of climate change from a fresh perspective and to see what I really thought about it, keeping my mind open. So I've been doing that for I don't know how long now, let's say a year or so. And I found some interesting things, and those things have led to today's talk. And basically, the title, I love the title. It's Eagle's Eye View, meaning like a view from 10,000 feet or so. So how solving the climate crisis, and this implies that I believe it can be solved, and I'll show you the data that I think is fairly convincing that shows that we indeed can solve the problem and solve it very nicely. But how when you solve the problem, it also happens to solve several other of the major problems that the UN works on called the Sustainable Development Goals. And it solves several of those, at least three other ones in addition to climate, at no additional cost. So it's kind of a fun thing to do. So that's what we'll be doing tonight. My principal interest in life these days is solving the climate crisis. So I want to get out there and do it and get it done. I'd like to to have the UN take advantage of the materials you're going to be seeing tonight so that they can improve what they're doing. And I guess most of all, I'd really like to make this climate crisis sensible to you. I think that we in the science community do a terrible job of communicating with other communities. We use too much jargon, we make it not clear. So my goal is to present everything at the level of a basic taxi cab driver. That would be like a 10th grade level. So that's the level we'll be using tonight. It works perfectly well in graduate schools also. So here's the plan for tonight. Where are we now? It's always a good question. Then can we win the fight? Why do all this bothering if we can't win? And if we win it, do we foul up everything else that's in our society? Or do we actually benefit other things? So those are the three pieces we'll be looking at. We'll start off with where are we now? The United Nations has been looking at the climate problem since the first COP meeting, Conference of Parties meetings back in 1995. And it actually got something organized on climate back in 97. It's called the Kyoto Protocol. So it's essentially a set of rules about how to discuss the climate problem within the UN framework. Then by 2005, they did something marvelous. There was this problem of the hole in the ozone layer that lets ultraviolet light from the sun get through the Earth's atmosphere without being absorbed and causes a lot of skin cancer. In fact, if the hole is big enough, it could make it impossible to have life on the surface of the planet. So they came up with a protocol there called the Montreal Protocol that essentially stabilized and is improving the problem. And then finally, in 2015, this is the key one, they had a meeting called the Paris Accord. And that's the one we're going to be talking about tonight. So the goals of the Paris Accord were fairly interesting. They said they want to keep the temperature rise well below 2 degrees C, and they hope that we will be able to come up with something that's 1.5 degrees C. So this is an aspirational goal. They want to reach a peaking of the greenhouse gases as soon as possible. And they want to achieve a thing called net zero, and I'll explain what that means. That essentially means if once you reach net zero, that your climate essentially doesn't get any worse. But it also means you are stuck with whatever you have at that point. So I think I'll convince you tonight that the ones that are in yellow here that we actually will be able to do. The second one here, I think the UN program is a little weak on that, and I'll explain why. But this Paris Accord was signed by 195 nations, so that's quite a amazing thing to have happen. Okay, a little bit about net zero. This is a analogy to how things work for the planet. A somewhat simplified analogy. It's called the bathtub analogy. And what it does is shows a bathtub here. And the height of the water in the bathtub is a measure of the concentration of the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And coming in red here, we have new emissions. So these new emissions are so many tons per year coming in. And then we have a hose coming out of the bathtub, which represents the Earth's ability to absorb on its own a certain amount of CO2 per year. So what happens is if the red stuff coming in is greater than the green going out, the height of the water in the bathtub will rise and rise. That'll mean the concentration of the atmosphere will get higher and higher. If we get to a situation where the red is equal to the green, what happens there is called net zero. So that's where the emissions equal the removal. And so this is a simplified way of keeping track of everything. It's a really good way to do it, though. Because it's always nice whenever you work on these problems to really sort of have a gut level understanding of how the darn thing works. So that's net zero. Now, and we'll talk about before whether net zero itself is a good idea or do you have to do something more than that a little bit later. These are examples of the greenhouse gas emissions. You can see that our society is based on fossil fuels. And that what happens with that is that we have a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. The CO2 and other equivalent kind of pollutants go into the air, and it's making things hotter and hotter. And that's pretty evident these days. Let's see if this works here. Nope, I have to push the button here. Hang on a second. Advance manually and get back into this. Okay, there we go. Now, what happens is some of the greenhouse gases in the bathtub initiative, there's that hose, the green hose, where the stuff is being removed. And some of it's removed by the land, and this is an example of land removal. Trees like to suck up CO2, soil likes to absorb it, and so forth. Well, it can also be removed by the sea. So basically, those are the two basic removal processes, land and sea. Now, a little story that you may not know, and I think this will be an interesting one for you, is how a scientist from San Diego, this guy Ramanathan, Professor Ramanathan from UCSD, helped shape the Pope's climate change plans. What happened is wrong. That's what everyone calls him because Ramanathan is too hard to say for most people. Ram invited about a dozen or so of his friends to come with him to meet with the Pope's Science Academy, Papal Academy. That's about 100 science folks that routinely advise the Pope. This has been going on for a while since the time of Galileo. So what happened is they're getting ready to go into a meeting room with the 100 science folks in the academy, and all of a sudden, a little white car starts driving around the lot there, and they see this car. Then a guy gets out of the car with a little white beanie. So it's the Pope getting out, and he's coming towards these guys. And so this guy here, this Monsignor, says to Rom, "Would you like to give the Pope your elevator speech?" And so he gave him his 2-minute elevator speech on climate, and the Pope was pleased. And they went on to meet with these 100 scientists to discuss climate for a week. An entire week was spent on it with about 100 of these Pope scientists. And they talked about the science, the sociology, the technology, and whatever else they could think of. And that led, it was so detailed a meeting, that led to the Pope producing a book. It was called Laudato Si. That book was very, very well accepted. There are millions of copies sent out and sold. And what happened is that led the people who were meeting at the next UN meeting to actually have an idea of how to solve the problem. So his book came out, was well read. It impressed a lot of people, impressed particularly the UN people, and they came to this agreement, the Paris Accord. So that's a little background story. Now, the key to understanding this stuff, and I think that's the key that you want to have when you're working on any kind of problem, have something that's fairly understandable, fairly simple, that allows you to see what's happening. So this is one of the graphs. This is the key graph behind the whole plan to basically solve the climate crisis. And I'll go into a little bit of details here. What it shows is the year 2000, year 2100 on this axis here. Up here, it shows you the emissions that come from various sources per year. And units are gigatons per year. And you use the giga because of your computers. So what they did is they showed, this is a curve here. Suppose we do nothing. We forget about the climate being a problem and we just go merrily on our way and conduct our society the way we feel like it. Well, this is called a business as usual curve. So it's this red curve going up here, and it leads to a temperature of about 4.6 degrees centigrade. This is enough to make the land uninhabitable for humans, essentially. So they concluded you have to do something better than that. And the plan that they decided to go for is down here. It's the green curve. They said, well, let's get down to where it's 2 degrees C or better. Okay. So that's the goal, get to the green curve. Now, to get to the green curve, you have to basically get rid of some of these emissions that were in here, and in fact, the amount in the area of the green curve. So if you take emissions per year times years, you get emissions. So in here, we have about the emissions that we have to get rid of. We have to get rid of about 5,000 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Okay, so that's our goal. Now, how do we make sense out of that? Well, let's do something that might be simple. This is the area of San Diego County. Suppose we go and we get a lot of sand, and we basically cover the San Diego County with sand up to a height of 30 feet. If we do that, and we have to get rid of this 5,000 gigatons of sand, what happens is we'd have to cover San County 27 times. So that's our goal. Cover San Diego with sand to 30 feet 27 times. Pretty simple goal, nothing too mysterious about that. So let's see what happens. So this is the plan that we have here. Let's see where we are back in November of 23. It's about 8 years after this plan. So now the curve looks different. We have, instead of all green, we have a lot of yellow here. Yellow means that we have already prevented or removed this amount of CO2 from the atmosphere. So this is 3,500 gigatons. That's about, we've removed 70% of what we need to remove. So we are doing great. So instead of having to basically cover San Diego 27 times, the job we have in front of us now is to just cover it 8 times. So it's a lot easier than what we started with. And when you examine the details, it turns out that it's a very desirable thing to do. But there are some questions about it. Like, we might be talking about energy independence and preserving all sorts of things like rainforest and livable cities and clean water, et cetera, et cetera. But some people feel like, what if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? So let's see what we can do here. It's a little bit difficult for us to perceive changes that occur slowly. That's just we're kind of wired to be able to respond to something like a rattlesnake. If we see a rattlesnake, we respond very quickly to that. But if we do something that's so if we respond like a frog, put frog in hot water, thing jumps out right away, no problem at all. So that's a quick response. But if we put a frog into cold water and gradually heat it, he's happy as a clam there until he just gets cooked. That's more like our situation. As we see things going slowly from year to year, it's really tough for us to get our act together and to have an adequate response. So let me give you some reasons why you might want to get your act together. Let's take an example here. This is a forest fire curve showing that basically in these different locations, these are the forest fire frequencies. How often do they come back in the 80, 40, 93 time? These are fires that are 1,000+ acres in the U.S. This is the same thing a quarter of a century later. Now, anybody can see that there's a giant difference between this curve and this curve here. But if we do it from year to year, we don't perceive the differences. It's all so gradual. We adjust to it, and we think it's normal. So it leads to kind of things like Los Angeles catching on fire. So what happens is because of our sort of psychological design, I guess it is, we basically have problems, and we need something sort of big to get us interested. So anyway, this is something that stirred up a lot of interest in California and around the world. There have been forest fires in Canada, and what happened up there is the trees are basically dying more quickly than they used to because the temperatures changed the order of a half a degree or so. And this changes the life cycle of some little bugs that live in the trees and eat the trees. They're having babies twice as often. And that's enough to totally change the ecosystem up there, dry out a lot of trees. And in this particular story, it's about fires that went from the Pacific clear over to the almost to the Atlantic in Canada. And there was so much smoke of it, it really messed up the air quality in Europe and the US. In fact, New York City for a while was the most polluted city on earth because of these fires. We have problems also with the production of food. Uh, these are the main crops that humans take for various calories. About two-thirds of our calories are determined by maize, wheat, rice, soy, and they're all dropping because of temperature. So it can be a very, very serious problem. Also, what we find out is that we have floods. It's hard for people to feed one another. We're getting a lot of people displaced by extreme weather. In 2022, numbers were about 31.8 million people. This turns out to be 3.5 million people more than the people that are displaced by conflict. So immigration used to be driven mostly by conflict. Now it's driven mostly by basically climate change. So here we have some questions. So there's your chance I gave you a lot on your plate there. So I'd like to hear what questions you have.
Everybody, feel free to unmute yourselves to chime in if you have any questions for Dr. Tom.
Tom, you waved a magic wand and said somehow we removed 3.5 gigatons or 3,500 gigatons of CO2 and sort of used it as a given that we did that. How did we do that? What have we
Oh,
done?
by doing the things that you're all very familiar with, building, basically shifting from fossil fuels significantly into renewables. So instead of burning coal, oil, and natural gas, as our sole source, it was something like 90% of our energy came from those. It basically got shifted to where we are now, significantly less. And we did that through things like having solar panels that gets rid of a lot of greenhouse gases. Doing things like EVs, electric vehicles, that gets rid of a lot of greenhouse gases. They also tend to solve the air quality problems of many cities. So that's what we've done. We basically are shifting technologies from fossil fuel-based technologies to technologies that are based on basically cleaner, really, really more advanced, better designed technologies. So the old technologies had their day for 150 years or so, and now it's just they're becoming too much of a problem for us. And so we have to be smart enough to slip in new technologies and do it in a way that makes sense to our quality of life.
Dr. Tom, here's a question that was just entered into chat by Chloe Hunter. She says, "Hello, Dr. English. Question: how do you think people should approach communicating about the climate crisis? How much scientific information do you think is needed to be effective?"
I think you'll get all the scientific information that you need from this talk, maybe more than you need. And to be effective, I think the trick is to just talk to your friends and neighbors. Just talk to them. And what will happen is right now, our society is set up so that issues like climate change are not socially acceptable. So if you bring up a topic like that, you might get a lot of people looking funny at you. But be brave, bring up the topic, and uh, and then talk about it. And what you'll find out is you don't understand a certain number of things, and as you basically talk about it with other people, that'll motivate you to figure out how to understand the things that you don't understand. And what will happen is your confidence will get bigger and bigger as you do it. And so what will happen is you'll become more and more effective, and then other people will become more and more effective. And as you get more and more people affected this way, what happens is all of a sudden victory is in sight.
That's a great answer. And to Derek Cassidy and Charles Langley, and everybody else who came in a little bit after the initial greeting. You're welcome to unmute yourselves and ask Dr. Tom your questions directly. If you prefer not to, please feel free to put it in the chat as well. So while you guys are thinking about whether you want to ask your questions directly, I have a question for you, Dr. Tom, which goes back to one of your first slides in regard to Dr. Ram meeting with the Pope in December of 2014. As some of us are aware, that white smoke was emitted from the conclave earlier today, and therefore a new pope has been chosen as of today. And apparently, new Pope Leo the 14th, also known as Cardinal Robert Prevost, um, is very closely aligned to Pope Francis in regard to environmentalism. Could you speak more to that? And also maybe tie it in to the previous question about how do we communicate this to the world? And if you think that this opportunity at this point in our American political system might have some value.
Fine, sure, Meryl. Well, basically today, the new Pope um, mentioned Francis explicitly, very glowing terms twice during his inaugural address, and then he went on to pledge that he's going to follow the same policies that Francis has been following. Now, his policies are somewhat controversial in parts of the Catholic Church. So it's interesting to see that he came along so strong in terms of it. So I think that's as great a change as we could see. I mean, I loved Francis. I thought he was a great guy and fantastic and did a marvelous job, but he died. So his successor looks like he's a big help.
Wonderful. Phil, you had a question?
Hi, this is Nina. Hi, Tom. How are you?
Hi, Nada, how you doing?
I'm good. With public watchdogs, of course. And my question is that considering the current political climate, how can we move forward to solutions when it seems as though some of the impediments are pointing us, pulling us, or pushing us in the opposite direction?
Well, the Trump administration philosophy is burn, baby, burn, or drill, baby, drill. And I guess that means translates
That's my point.
yeah. So I think I'll show you how that works a little bit later in the talk. But the basic idea is that the people that build electrical power plants are somewhat sensible. And what they do, if they have a fuel that's a heck of a lot cheaper than some other fuel, they use the cheaper fuel. So it just turns out that solar right now and wind are far cheaper than everything else. And so I'll show you the numbers. There's a whole maybe 5 minutes of that in coming up that basically show that we're doing fine. And it also shows that some of our adversaries are doing a heck of a lot better than we are. And that some of the people who have been having a romance with coal are shifting, like India. So I'll get into all that a little bit later.
I see. Great. Thank you, Tom.
Phil, you had a question. Do you want to ask that now? You're on mute.
Can't hear you, Phil.
You're muted, Phil.
So
Hey.
sorry. Let's go for the gifted. The International Energy Agency has been showing the total amount of fossil fuel basically over the last 10, 15 years. And while it's true that the renewables are coming online extraordinarily large volumes, especially in China, it does look like the amount of fossil fuels has either remained the same or is increasing. So it doesn't appear that the renewables coming online are effectively displacing enough of the fossil fuel, because it's still right around 80% of all the world's energy still is fossil fuel. So what's the extrapolated situation, do you think, in the next 5, 10 years?
Well, the data you have is the same data I have. So, we agree. And I believe that the projections are that it's either this year or next year that things start to turn around. Okay. And we really get our act together somewhere around 2035. And I'll show you those curves a little bit later. But it's like we are making progress, but we got off to a lousy start. And the start then got changed by the technology. So the fact that the solar panels and wind became cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and that the EVs became cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, all of a sudden that sort of made up for our political ineptitude. So it's kind of saved our bacon for a while. And so we're breaking about even now, but the numbers I show you will basically, I hope, convince you that things will get better soon.
Okay.
Climate Trace released a report, I think yesterday, recently anyway, that said emissions this year compared to last year were down 0.55%. So 0.5% less today than this time last year.
So maybe that really is the peak, and then we're on our way down. But the numbers I'll show you about the future plans for, like, for example, new electrical systems are just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to go well.
Derek, you have a question?
Thank you, guys. How many parts per million before we can't breathe the air? Carbon.
Oh, it's a slow process. The planet is designed in terms of what we're used to have the concentration somewhere below about 300 parts per million and down to about 180 parts per million in the air. If you get below 180 parts per million, the Earth turns into a snowball. Okay, so you don't want that. And if it gets above 300 parts per million, things start to heat up. We're currently somewhere around 425 or so.
430.8 this morning.
Okay.
So this is 430 of greenhouse gases. How much of a concentration before it displaces oxygen? Enough so it survive.
It's displacing it right now. It's just, it's just one of these gradual things, like the frog, slowly heating up in the pot. So our problem is that if we continue the trajectory that we were on, the old trajectory, business as usual, we basically produce a planet that we can't live on. And that would be sometime by the 21st century. So that means, forget about all this other stuff. You just don't have a planet that you can live on anymore. So you may have some people surviving, but not very many. So that's what's happening, and we're really pushing the limits. And Roger Revelle, who was one of the founders of UCSD, knew about all this, and he said that we're conducting a global, uncontrolled experiment, and he says he wished us well. So, we have to do better. And I'll show you that we have well within our capabilities, the ability to do better and do it in such a way that you'll be very pleased with the quality of life that you have during the transition, as well as where you end up.
Okay,
why don't we move on to the next one?
Yeah, part 2.
Okay, let me get
back.
back.
Before we move on, Dr. Tom, do you have time for a couple of more questions that came into chat from the first segment?
Oh, sure. I mean, you're the timekeeper.
Okay, so Nikki Valdemole, excuse me, Nikki, for mispronouncing. Question is, with the political target for defunding green climate environment, what are some strategies for us to carry on in our actions to make a difference and build a regenerative planet?
Well, I think what you do is you have to take part in the process. So get out there and whatever the opportunities are, whatever it is you like, just go do something. It doesn't matter what you do, but go do something. Talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, whatever, and do something. So there are marches that take place. There are various letter writing campaigns that take place where you threaten to withhold buying things from certain companies if they don't have sensible greenhouse kind of gases. You can write nasty letters to your politicians, basically telling them you're not going to vote for them unless they shape up. So all those are some of the things you can do. There's probably a list of hundreds of things you can do, but don't worry about doing the optimum. Just get out there and do something, you know. And what'll happen is, you know, your instincts will lead you to doing better and better and better as it goes along.
Allison Inglis writes, when I ask AI if we've removed 70% of the 5,000 gigatons of carbon we need to remove already, it answered no. Some 2 billion metric tons of carbon are removed annually, but this is a small fraction of the estimated 7 to 9 gigatons needed to be removed annually to meet the goals by 2050. How do we reconcile these two estimations?
Well, first of all, you know, you have to take a look at who's doing the calculation, you know, and then does the calculation make sense to you? If it doesn't make sense to you, if you don't understand it, I mean, don't believe it, you know, because, you know, science is based on skepticism. So, you know, you have to basically, so what I did is I stripped the thing bare and looked at it and examined it using, I'll tell you about this computer system at MIT a little bit later, but using essentially one of the world's best climate models that allows me to get inside the guts of the system, put in policies that I think make sense, and see if they do make sense, if they work. So we'll get into that in some details, but basically, numbers that you get, you know, it's garbage in, garbage out. So, you know, you have to be very careful about all these random numbers that are around there. That diagram that I gave you is a very simple diagram, and it's in every time the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change puts out a new thing, like every 3 years or so they put out a new set of things. That's the one that's the main one. So I'd say stick with the main things and you'll do well.
A couple more questions, but I think that you might actually address them in the next segment. So why don't we go ahead and move on?
Okay, sure. Let me get back onto that. So let's see. I want to get down to here, share, click on the right thing here, which is here. Okay. Did that get me there? Okay, so can we win the fight? Let's look at various things that can be used for generating electricity. This is a graph from coal going back to 1900. And you can see that it started out fairly pricey, you know, 300 bucks per unit here, which is a certain number of dollars per megawatt hour. And it went down and down until around 60, then it went up and up until it's around 100 now. Okay. Then natural gas, I have it showing in here, about the same as coal for a while, then it starts to get cheaper than coal. So it's a contender. And nuclear started off reasonably cheap, and then it's getting more and more expensive, although it's fairly flat. So then there's the new contenders here, wind and solar. And you can see solar is dropping like a rock. And so basically, in terms of which is the most economical for a company to use these days, it's solar. And I'll show you the numbers. There are some projections about solar energy progress. It was a total surprise to us how it worked. Okay, so that's what happens. Life is full of surprises. In 2002, Bloomberg came up with a projection that said the solar energy market will grow 1 gigawatt per year by 2010. Okay, so that's a number, 1 gigawatt per year. Gigawatt's about half the size of San Onofre when it was working. The reality is that by the year 2010, that the solar energy exceeded that goal by 17 times. And if we see where we are today, or in 2023, we are already 445 times that. So this is why it worked. It just basically was so darn cheap that the guys decided to use it. This is the projections of the US for 2025, and this includes the impact of the Trump organization. In terms of new capacity, new stuff that's being built for the electrical grids of the country, what we find out is that 93% of the new capacity comes from solar and wind. And that includes battery. Because solar batteries essentially allow solar to work while the sun isn't shining. So that basically says that that natural gas is just a small part of the system here. Let's take a look at this curve, this data here, and compare what's happening with China and India. Just to show that it's not just the US, okay? This is China, okay, in 2023. A lot of coal here, but again, you see the big piece is wind and solar. 79% of the new stuff is from solar and wind. And we have some coal. Apparently the Chinese are using their coal, but they're basically finding out that it's not as cheap as they like. You'll see what they're doing. This is a picture of a solar panel in one of the provinces in China. They added 260 gigawatts of solar capacity in 23. That's like building 130 San Onofres in 1 year. This amount is more than the amount of solar that the US and Australia have installed in all time. So they did more in 1 year than the US and Australia have done in all time. So the Chinese are certainly making good contributions, and they're basically aiming to do even better and better, because this is where they think it makes sense to be. Let's look at India. This is back in 23 again. 71% is solar and wind again. A lot of coal. So they were basically doing a lot of stuff here. Let's look at the trends for India. There it is, going up, and whoa, up. This is one of those Al Gore charts. I love them. So this is by 2030. They're going to be producing plans to have 500 gigawatts. That's, again, 250 San Onofres of electrical capacity in place. So they are going gangbusters. And again, it's just because this is the cheapest way to do it. Let's see, we got this having a little problem here. Escape. Advance. And then, let's see that. I think that'll work. Where do we go from here? Here we've got wind out there at the Banning Pass, looking good. Lots of wind capacity around the world, filling the deserts with a lot of solar. We have EVs. They're getting cheaper and cheaper, so that they are not only better performers in terms of, say, fossil fuel cars, but they are also cheaper. So we're now looking for some sort of path to the future. We'll talk about that, like from the Wizard of Oz here. So to keep track of all this stuff, it's really complicated. We want to use some kind of computer to help with do it, to provide a good path to the future. Just make sure that the policies that we basically are pushing really make sense. So some people that advocate for this computer system, it's called En-ROADS. Senator John Kerry He was the climate czar under President Biden. He says En-ROADS is quite simply a climate crisis game changer for policymakers across the country. John Holdren was Obama's science advisor, and he's past president of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. He's talking about a predecessor, sort of a competing system with En-ROADS called C-ROADS. It has more details of the country's models, emissions. He loves it, essentially. So these two guys say it's great. Now, this is, there are a group of people called En-ROADS ambassadors that use this stuff here. You can see there's 876 in the world. They're in 161 countries. They've had events with over 300,000 participants. And you get a real sharp eye here. You'll see 15 here in San Diego. And I'm one of the 15. So it's a really nice system. This system was designed by some people at MIT. They've been working on this kind of problem since the 70s. You may have heard of limits to growth. Some of those people were the founders of this kind of system, and their students have taken over. And now today, it's their students that are running it. The system runs on an ordinary laptop, so you don't need anything fancy to use it. It's very intuitive and easy to use. It's founded on the best available science. And what they do is they update the whole system every 30 days. So it's a marvelously up-to-date system, and they compare their system with several other systems so you can make sure it's the best. It uses a thing called a slider that lets us put in our own climate policies, and we can see if they work. Talk about the sliders a little bit. There's sliders that lets you change policies on energy efficiency, transportation, carbon pricing, afforestation, and so forth. And you can see the results right away. So what they do is they unearth unique insights. You start to really learn how this system works. And that's nice if you have a complex system to actually understand what you're doing. The sliders are grouped into various areas. One group is energy. So there's a group for coal, oil, natural gas, carbon pricing. Talk about that in some more detail. Transportation, EVs, buildings. You can put numbers in for population growth, economic growth. I tend to leave these alone. I just use whatever the status quo numbers are, because I basically want to make sure that I'm understanding exactly what's happening. But in terms of the land and the food and the industry emissions, they talk about deforestation, methane gases. There's a big thing here where we're discovering that leaks are extremely important with methane. Carbon removal techniques, put something on a chimney to take the carbon out, have a new technology to do it. So basically, you have all these things available to you. Let's talk about how a slider works. Okay, a slider is basically one little lever in there. And let's talk about one with the carbon price here. Basically, this little dot shows you where you are now. And this red line says this is the status quo. This is where things are today. So they adjust that frequently. So what we're going to do is push on this slider and basically move it over. So we move it over there where we put a price on carbon, which means that's like a tax on carbon that basically makes you think whether or not you want to use whether you want to use coal, oil, or gas because it costs too much. So that's the kind of idea of how sliders work. Let's do an example. Some of you may have had some experience with Citizens Climate Lobby. That's an organization founded by Marshall Saunders. I worked with Marshall very close for many years. We would meet monthly to basically decide on strategies for the organization. Started out with one group across the bridge, and ended up with organizations all over the world now. So that's an example of one person just doing something. We can really grow. So let's put a price on carbon. So basically, this is our business as usual curve of CO2 emissions versus year. And it goes up and up and up, okay? then that baseline will lead to a temperature increase of 3.3 degrees C. This would be like going from today. So if we push on the carbon price, what happens is we make it carbon more expensive to get. And so what will happen is that'll cause the demand for carbon to go down. And we end up with a system that looks like this. It goes downward. So we have a better, the emissions drop significantly from the business as usual to our planned case here. So we're now aiming towards 3 degrees C as opposed to 3.3 degrees C. So that's a pretty good drop for just one slider. So that gives you an idea. Now, that you got the idea, let's use a whole lot of sliders simultaneously. Because our goal is to shift from fossil fuel usage here in the year 2000. The global economy is about 91% of its energy came from fossil fuels. And what we're doing is by using these assumptions down here, we end up getting renewables, which are about 3% over here, up to 71% by the year 2100. So that's what we're doing. So we push on oil, gas, coal, put a carbon price on, crank up efficiency for EVs, electrify a lot of things, make sure they have stations you can use, okay? Go for building efficiency, decrease deforestation significantly, to fix up those leaks in methane systems, get rid of afforestation and crank some technology in there. So we do all that at once, okay? And what we do is we end up, instead of going up here, this is the old number we had for 3.3, we end up with 1.4 degrees C. So we beat the Paris Accord goals of 2 degrees C. That's a lot lower than 2. And we also beat the aspirational goal of 1.5 degrees C. So yes, it can be done. So as what happens is, we talked about this a little bit earlier, the CO2 emissions are going up and up and up, and somewhere around today, they should be starting to drop. So we want to go on this slide down this curve here. And as the emissions drop, we want to increase the amount of absorption, the amount of CO2 that's either prevented or taken out of the atmosphere, until we get a place here where the new emissions are equal to the old emissions, and we call that net zero. And if you go beyond net zero, which is what I'm advocating, what we do is we then take the CO2 that's in the atmosphere, we suck the CO2 out of the atmosphere, and we basically get back to weather systems that are much better than what we have now. So that's represented by this CO2, yellow, is coming out of the atmosphere. So let's look at the same kind of thing in a different way. This is the business as usual curve for CO2. This shows us, well, we said the number was whether in the high 300s here, going up and up and up. And if we follow this plan, it goes up for a while until about 2035, and then it starts dropping down to 2100. So what we've done is we basically got it to drop there, and that basically takes us back to the weather that we had somewhere around the year 2010. Now, that may not be good enough for you, because 2010 did have some significant problems with fires and things like that, and floods. So we may want to go back further, but then that's just a matter of going back into the system, changing your assumptions, and see what happens, and see if it makes sense. So we went from the worst weather of 2035, that's when the weather gets as bad as it gets, to relatively good weather of 2010. Okay, a few more questions.
If no other questions related to the second segment, let me introduce another question by Nina. And maybe this will speak to the fact that nuclear doesn't seem to be showing up as a one of the remedies moving forward. Can Dr. English comment on the claims that small molecular nuclear reactors, SMRs, cannot melt down? Also, what about Bill Gates' effort to restart the failed reactor at 3 Mile Island?
Yeah, the what I did on nukes is I just left the levers at business as usual. So I didn't make any changes there. I didn't want to overly bias the analysis of a nukes, just so I just left it go where it was. So this means kind of taking whatever policies the government is doing now and just extending them into the future. So that was the basic idea there. And what happened is that nukes do go up a little bit, but not very much by the year 2100. And so that basically, in terms of solving the problem, it's a very small component of the solution. Now, in terms of things like, let's take the small modular reactors. Small used to mean small, but now it means something like a third the size of the San Onofre system. So they're getting to be, small is getting to be big because the economics of small, even if you do a pencil and paper analysis, doesn't look very good. So small is becoming larger. Now, whether I think we've already shown you don't really need nuclear to do it. So I think that answers the first question. There was a second question there about nukes, and I'm not sure I got it.
The second one is, what about Bill Gates' effort to restart the failed reactor at 3 Mile Island?
Well, God bless them. They're trying to get electricity for some power centers for AI systems, essentially. And those things, the current designs of them apparently are energy hogs. And so they need to get the systems going, and they need some place where they don't have to go through all the permitting. So the idea of using an old nuclear reactor that was at least using the land there basically allows them in their mind to be able to avoid all the permitting hassle that you have. So
Yeah,
I think that's basically it.
Dr. English, what I'm concerned about is this idea of small modular nuclear reactors that aren't really that small as you observed, but also this idea of literally school bus sized reactors that I think it's General Atomics locally is touting those, and the idea that it's feasible and even desirable to put a nuclear reactor in every neighborhood, where we might have, instead of 100 nuclear sites, we have 1,000 or many thousands of them across the United States. And I'm wondering if you see this as a desirable or manageable prospect, and in light of Joe Biden's energy plan, expanded nuclear to make it 35% of the USA's energy mix. Plus, we've got these predictions of AI requiring 2, possibly 3 times as much electricity as what we're using right now. And I'm wondering just if you can expand and elaborate a little bit on with your thoughts on nuclear.
Sure. The basic idea is that you have some design that's supposed to have some advantages over the current system. Current system basically costs too much, way too much. I don't think there's any argument on that anymore. And there is a minor problem with a disposal of high-level nuclear waste. I mean, the stuff lasts in terms of being toxic. It lasts the order of 100,000 years or so. So, it's just hanging around. And in terms of toxicity, the if you were to just do it and compare it with, say, botulism, the stuff that did in society during the before the Renaissance, uh, it's actually more dangerous than the stuff that carried the bubonic plague. So, it's nasty stuff, needs to be handled. We seem to do our best to handle it by using press releases saying what a good job we're doing, and we don't seem to do anything that's substantive in terms of the waste. So it's a problem. Now these new reactors are supposed to not have waste. So what I've done is look through some of the old Oregon code and some of the designs that were around about 20, 30 years ago, because these reactors tend to be pretty much old design reactors. And they have a problem of waste. It just changes the what do you call it? How much relative amount is the amount of U-235, americium, et cetera. So basically, you still have the same qualitative problem with nuclear waste. You just change the numbers of each thing. So it's just as dangerous as the old stuff. So I think that you have to put a little bit of reality into examining some of these proposals, and I think that there aren't enough people that are checking out these proposals because I think they're not very realistic at all.
Mhm.
That's as good as I can do, Charles.
Yeah. Could I just add to that, Tom?
Sure.
Mark Jacobson, in his book No Miracles Needed, has a chapter uh, on nuclear, and it's impossible to read that chapter and come away with any sense that nuclear makes any sense at all. I mean, it's just utter nonsense. All the things you said, Tom, plus it takes a long time to build, to permit and build the facilities. They're very expensive. We have limited quantities of fuel. And you didn't mention, but this is the foundation of some nasty weapons. And
Now let me talk
the more
about that a
that
little bit.
proliferates, the more problem you got there.
Well, yeah, there's a little thing called proliferation. That what you do in these systems that Gates et al. Are promulgating is you start using plutonium as an item of commerce. Okay, so you sort of move it around the economy like coal. Now we have a hell of a time keeping track of plutonium in the current system. Okay, we do pretty good, but once in a while we lose a little bit of it. It's called MUF, missing and unaccounted for. But if you now all of a sudden expand your energy system based on plutonium, you're just asking for trouble because people are going to basically be have a black market for plutonium, and people will be making at least dirty bombs, if not fission bombs. So that's going to make it really tough to live. So I think that's just a bad idea.
Tom, I have a question. I want to go back to the question that was asked in part one about the AI, talking about we need more emission, need to remove more than we're uh, removing by a factor of 4 or 5 or something like that each year. And I think about the data from Climate Trace, the same report I was referring to a bit ago. We are adding to the atmosphere 62 gigatons of CO2 equivalent uh, this year. And last year it was 61 gigatons. And we have a budget that we're going to bust in the next few years to stay, under 2 degrees C. James Hansen says 2 degrees is passe. We've already exceeded it. There's no way to stay under 2 degrees. And the continual growth of the CO2e in the atmosphere I don't see how that. Maybe you can help us understand how does your analysis deal with the fact that emissions are and the CO2 in the atmosphere are continuing to increase, even as we speak, and we're rapidly closing one budget, and we can maybe open another budget, but then you're talking about more degrees of heating, and you add to this stuff like there are recent reports in Nature magazine where they talk about trees possibly removing less CO2 now than they had in the past. We may have reached a biological saturation point in some sense. And another huge possible tipping point of methane permafrost exploding into the atmosphere and perhaps being uncontrollable. How does this analysis deal with, this collection of things I've just tossed out?
Well, those are good points, Joe. These are all good. You basically need to respond to things that are out there on the streets and see what makes sense. Well, basically, what we've basically said so far is that we think we're peaking around this year, okay? And so that means that you start to go downhill. Now, those numbers I showed you for India and China, okay, are startling. The Chinese numbers, okay, they just revised them, I guess, a couple months ago. They basically said that in 2024, they have already exceeded their plans for the year 2030. In other words, their current emissions, their current building is 6 years ahead of the schedule that they had. And the stuff that's basically that I've been using is basically based on their old numbers, okay? Those Indian numbers are comparable to the Chinese numbers, okay? They're not in the plans. So what I see is that basically we have a non-cooperation of the Trump administration, which is going to foul up the U.S. U.S. is the second largest emitter right now. China's first. Whereas we're getting a good behavior on the part of China and good behavior on the part of India. So, the Trump administration will make things a little bit worse, but it doesn't have the levers to control what is being bought by the utilities. So the utilities are still going to buy the things that are cheap as cheap as they can get them. And that's going to be solar, wind, batteries. Okay, so what I see is that the curves are getting better and better than we expected. So then you put all this into some sort of machine that keeps track of all the accounting and what you need to do that, and then that tells you where you go. You can't do this just pencil and paper sort of thing. And so that's the problem with Hansen. Jim tends to be more of a pencil and paper guy. I love him. He's a good guy. We belong to many of the same organizations, have some of the same awards. But he does tend to be more of a pencil and paper guy. So I think that I would invite him to do some of his analysis on the En-ROADS system and see what he gets.
Guys, in the spirit of moving this forward, I'm going to combine some questions by Mary Gilman, Louis Waylog, and David Lacritz. Mary's asking if there are some who suggest that solar and wind can't keep up with the increasing demand for electricity. What do we say to them? While Lois is saying, what about geothermal power? I believe I saw an article saying that the Trump administration was in favor of pursuing it. That involves drilling and could keep DJT happy, exclamation point. While David is saying, hello, Dr. English, I'm enjoying your presentation very much. I was wondering how much confidence we have in the model behind En-ROADS. For example, could there be some unknown unknowns lurking out there in the future that will produce some surprises and require significant course correction, i.e., something that will render the current projections obsolete. An example might be more rapid permafrost melting and methane release, perhaps acting as a catalyst toward creating some tipping point or runaway situation through positive feedback.
Well, let's start with the toughest one first. That's always a good way to go. The tipping point question is a real question. I mean, we are just learning how the planet works. Okay, we don't know everything about how it works, and we've come a heck of a long way in the last 30 years. I mean, the first conference I went to in the University of North Carolina in the 70s was they had the best people on earth at the conference, and some said it was going to get warmer. I said, okay, that's good. It's a climate change conference. Some said it's going to get colder. I said, huh? What do you mean colder? It's supposed to be a climate conference. Some said it's going to get warmer and then get colder. Some said it's going to be colder and then get warmer. So we didn't have a clue back in the 70s about how things worked. So we have learned a heck of a lot in the meantime. We've spent a lot of money and we've learned a lot. So we now understand most of the ordinary things of how things work. Now, there are things like the permafrost, how that works. Very controversial, a lot of disagreement among various people in the sciences as to exactly how it works. Some say it could happen, your methyl hydrates could just all go at once and wow, you've lost the whole ball game, which is a possibility. Some say, no, it's actually really slow and it's not a problem at all. So, we don't have real confidence in science there. We also could have a problem with the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream could, it's a thing that goes by Florida and up towards Ireland and keeps Europe warm, essentially. If the Gulf Stream doesn't go in the right direction, or if it just becomes weaker and weaker, what happens is Europe freezes, and that kills their economy. So people start dying from lack of food. So that could happen too. So there are some of those things that basically I did not try to solve all that in this, because I took the stuff that I thought that we knew something about, and let's do that. No, you could, there's nothing wrong with people looking at all these things, and I think it's good to do that. But we need to sharpen our pencils a little bit and get the theories to a place where we all have some sort of reasonable level of confidence, and we haven't reached that yet. So that was part of the questions. There were some other ones in there too, but I've forgotten them all.
Okay,
there were at least three separate big questions.
Yeah, so Lois is asking about geothermal power and how that
Oh,
might.
geothermal. Let's do that one next, because that's an easy, it's a slam dunk. Geothermal is a great source. Okay, there's two flavors of geothermal. There's surface geothermal, where you dig a hole that's maybe 10 feet deep, something like that, and you basically use that to increase the efficiency of your heating and cooling system. Or you dig a big hole that goes down into the magma of the earth, and it basically just you push water down a pipe, and the water gets converted to steam by the magma, and it produces electricity. A wonderful way to do it. So yeah, I mean, Trump got that one right. So that's a good way to go if you can do it. You have to, again, get to the numbers and compare the numbers with the numbers of the competition. But I think geothermal is certainly a good one to do. And the one I really like is the surface geothermal, because you're not taking any real risk there. And what you're doing is you're having the whole economy get much more efficient. So was there a third piece, Phil or Merle?
Well, the crux of the first question was actually that there's a lot of discussion about wind and solar not really being able to keep up with the increasing demand, and so the question is, what can we say to people who are not buying that our current trajectory with wind and solar is going to be more than enough if we do it right?
Well, I think the Chinese would be delighted to see the demand increase. They would easily solve the production problem. If the U.S. is not able to produce panels right now, most of the panels come from China anyway. But the Chinese would love to have a doubling of their need for solar. Yeah, they can handle that. There's plenty of stuff out there for it. It's just a matter of doing it. So does that do it for that, or should we get on to the next section?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let me get on there then. Let's see. I'll get into here. And back here. And whoops, stop share. Here we go. I'm going to start share. Click on that and go there. Sure. Okay. And go here. There we go. So we got those. Now, what about other impacts? If we do a wonderful job and we solve the climate crisis and we wreck the rest of our society, that's not so good. So let's look at some other components to see if there are some things that are harmed and see if other things that are benefited by it. So let's take a look at the impacts. Again, we've done well with the Paris numbers. So we've now showed that it is very feasible to reach the numbers that the UN has. Okay, we can do that a little bit better. So that part should help with a lot of people that are basically disturbed by gloom and doom, because I think we're well beyond that. So basically, this shows the curve here of degrees Celsius versus time. This is the business as usual curve. This is the curve here that this plan produces. This is the 2.0 degree Celsius curve here. This is the 1.5 degree here. So what you can see is we end up, at 1.4. So we got that one really well. But we also have done some other things in there that we didn't plan to do, sort of things that happened surreptitiously. For example, we've now produced a system of affordable and clean energy. By building all these windmills and solar panels and batteries, et cetera, we've solved the UN problem of goal number 7. So basically, we put these windmills all over the place in the deserts, the panels in the deserts. We put the panels on top of factories. We put them on tops of homes. So affordable, and they're cheap. This is the cheapest stuff we have. So let's examine the cost of these energy systems and see whether they're cost effective. This is the basic curve here of total annual cost of energy in trillions of dollars per year. I'm now learning how to do trillions. In my early career with Pittsburgh plate glass, I learned how to do millions by fixing windshields of cars that were not working right. At EPA and General Dynamics, I learned how to handle billions of dollars. So now I'm practicing trillions. So basically, the curve for business as usual is the black curve, as always. It goes like this. And if we build these extra energy systems here that we're starting to do here, what we see is we are spending extra money that's above the business as usual curve. So we end up spending about $2.5 trillion more than we would have if we had business as usual to this curve here. Then after that, we get some benefits from building these systems. The solar stuff is cheaper, the wind is cheaper, the battery is cheaper, and so forth. So what we do is we start saving money. So if we go out to 2100, turns out the amount of money we save is the green stuff. So the area of green is 14.3 trillion. The expenses are 2.5 trillion. So what happens is that we saved a lot more than our extra expenses. So doing an analysis of it, we have a savings of 14.3 trillion. The extra costs are 2.5 trillion. The net savings are 11.8 trillion. The benefits are here. The cost is here. The benefit cost ratio is 4.7. So a very no-brainer benefit cost ratio that you should do it independent of solving the energy crisis. You should do it just to make money. Now, also, it turns out that we have impacts on some of the sustainable development goals involving goal number 14, life below water, and also life on land. So basically, how does solving the climate crisis impact life on Earth? This is a big question that we have here. We're in the situation right now where if we continue business as usual, we will destroy essentially much of the life on the planet. And so the life is going through sort of a funnel here, kind of a 21st century bottleneck. We have people going into the funnel. We have whales going in, alligators, elephants, trees, butterflies, etc. The key question for the 21st century, I believe, is what's coming out of the bottle. So what is that? So let's see how this problem here is impacted by the plan that we have here. We know that the whales are having a tough time. The population of marine invertebrates, this means things with the spinal column, declined by about 50% from 1970 to 2012. So that's a big number, big decline. And part of that is due to the fact that we're taking a lot of CO2 that would have gone into the air and sticking it into the oceans. And CO2 forms acid. And so we now have the oceans about 30% more acidic than they were, let's say 30 years ago. This is a curve giving you some idea of how that works. We're using this funny scale that the chemistry is called pH. It's sort of backwards. If pH gets lower, the acidification goes up. So anyway, what happens is business as usual would bring us to a level of about 7.88 on this scale here. And if we don't like that, that's a 30% acidity increase. We basically follow this plan here, which keeps it about the same as it is here back in the year 2000. So what happens is we get up to here in terms of the acidification gets back to where it was essentially. So what we're able to do by implementing this plan is we essentially get rid of 100 years of ocean acidification, removed. So this is a good kind of thing that I wasn't counting on in terms of the system. This just what happens when you get into the deep inside of the system. Now, in terms of species, we know of about 1.4 million species. This means these are the ones that we can count. We have numbers on them. They're in books and so forth. They have names. So we'll go with those as opposed to hypothetical species. So more than half of them are insects. You see a significant number of plants, significant amount of other animals. Now, this is one way to keep track of these. It's called a speciescape approach. We'll start out with invertebrates. Invertebrates are things that don't have a spinal column, like a butterfly doesn't have a spinal column, a lobster doesn't have a spinal column, etc. So what we find here is that of these insects, there's a lot of them. More than half of all the species on Earth are insects. Smaller number for these things like lobsters, clams, etc. And even smaller number for jellyfish. So that's the kind of grouping that we have for these species, the invertebrates. business as usual, if we continue where we are today and don't get on the kind of curve that we're talking about, what happens is we will have a 50% loss in invertebrate species, 50% by 2100. It's really bad. It's a disgrace, but it's what people are saying is happening. Now, on the other hand, if you follow this plan, what happens is you essentially get to numbers that are less than 1%, close to 0%. So that's really good for invertebrates. So good thing there. Let's look at vertebrates. We're a vertebrate. We have a spinal column. We're a mammal, one of these here. There are about 4,000 mammals, 6,000 species of birds, and about 18,000 species of fish. Let's look at the same thing for them. If you follow business as usual, it's not as bad as it is for the invertebrates. About 27% loss of invertebrates. And if we fix up the system, we lose about 1% of the invertebrates. So again, this may be more than you want, but it's a heck of a lot better than the red. Higher plants, same sort of thing. We will lose about 45% with business as usual. This is all bad stuff. So what this is saying is that we are heading towards the world's 6th great mass extinction unless we change it. If we follow this basic scenario here, we reduce this to about 3%. So what we've done is we basically made giant changes in vertebrates, invertebrates, plants, and then there's some details of other specific things here. You can see they're all real much better. So in terms of all of life, we've done a pretty good job avoiding this mass extinction. So this shows that we can prevent a 21st century mass extinction and more than satisfy the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. Now let's look at the cost, because all this stuff costs money. So again, we're doing trillions of dollars a year. This is 100 trillion here. This is our scale for time, year 2000, year 2100. This is the business as usual. So we would be up here around roughly $180 trillion a year. And we reduce it down here to something like, let's say, $70 trillion a year. So the difference is about $103 trillion per year in savings in the year 2100. So the plan that fixes things up is one heck of a lot better than basically staying with the business as usual. And we also save money during the rest of this time. So we estimate that it's about $3,000 trillion are saved. Just to give you some idea, the current US debt is about 36 trillion. So these numbers are very, very large compared to the US debt. So this means quality of life should be soaring. So what's the impact on our quality of life? Let's look at that. Let's examine our wages. Look at the gross domestic product. That's how much money is earned by people that work. And we'll divide that by how many people there are to get some idea of our standard of living. So basically what we see here is the black curve going up to here. The blue curve, the planned curve here going up about $10,000 a year better. So we do much better in terms of our standard of living. So it isn't like we're asking people to lose money, okay, or to suffer in implementing these things. Essentially, we're just asking you to change the way that you use energy, essentially. So in summary, we've seen we basically limit the temperature to 1.4 degrees C. We restore badly damaged atmospheric conditions to the year of the weather back to the year 2010. You fix the pH of the oceans back to the conditions of the year 2000. You prevent the 6th mass extinction of species. And you have very favorable economics. So this is good stuff. So it's kind of like the message that Moses gave to his troops. I have put before you life and death. which is certainly we're doing today. Blessings and curses. Now choose life so that you and your children may live. So there we are, folks. What kind of questions do you have?
Well, from chat, we have a question by Allison Inglis and a couple of statements and a question from Robert Dunn. I'm going to start with Allison's. You are so positive. What do you think is motivating so many doom and gloom predictions about our progress in addressing climate change? Does anyone benefit from those dire predictions?
Yes, yes, clearly. What happens is the the business as usual crowd benefits, specifically the fossil fuel companies, the oil companies, the coal companies, the gas companies. They all benefit from this, and they have a much better. They're much better organized than we are. They also have a lot more money, and they plan things out. They hire really good people that know how to do this kind of stuff, and we basically struggle our best to do something. So that's why basically the doom and gloom message is that leave us. You guys are never going to get anywhere with this climate stuff. So let's go back to the good stuff that we understand. Let's go back to drill, baby, drill, and that's the basic idea. So we've basically been outsmarted, outmanned, etc., and we haven't recognized our sort of lack of understanding. And so that's something that's a basic criticism of our science. We basically are still learning. So this is my venture into trying to get underneath this whole thing and see what in the heck is really going on. And it turns out that we're much, much better off than we thought we were. So, I'm hoping we can get some messengers out there of hope as opposed to more doom and gloomers.
Robert Dunn is asking or stating that carbon taxation seems to be a large part of your solution. And to that, how many carbon taxes have been approved so far? I'm assuming he's referring to on the federal level. And a few minutes later, he states that what you are proposing is politically impossible.
Well, carbon taxes, the U.S. doesn't have one. Marshall Saunders and the Citizens Climate Lobby people have been to Washington, D.C. at least a dozen times, and there's usually 1,000 of them or so that go each time. And they do very skillful lobbying. But money talks. The basic idea of a politician seems to be the most important thing in the universe is for them to get reelected. And so the way we have our system set up is basically anybody can give you a bundle of money. And so these people are I talked to Nancy Pelosi about this problem once. I said, Nancy, I said, how you doing? And she says, not very good. I said, what's going on? What's wrong? She says, I'm just not getting anything done. I said, why aren't you getting anything done? I've got to spend all my damn time on the phone. What are you doing on the phone? My staff makes me bring in $50,000 a day, okay? Or else we can't keep the staff afloat. I said, that's terrible. So I says, how do you get your work done? She says, I don't. So that's the problem. Now, other more civilized places, like England, don't have quite as bad a problem because what they do is they limit their election cycle to a much shorter period of time. Ours goes on for a couple of years anyway, and theirs is more like a couple of months. And then basically the airtime and things like that are provided by the government free. They just say, you all get airtime that you need. So that way, there still is corruption. I mean, you're always going to have that, but it's not nearly as designed, as systematic as our corruption is. So we need to fix that problem. It's a major hole in both. I mean, this is not Republicans versus Democrats. This is both of them. both sides have the same kind of problem, and they all know it.
Charles, go ahead.
Oh, Dr. English, I was looking at the pH scale that you were showing, and my understanding is that the actual pH scale is logarithmic. So a pH of 8 is literally 10 times more alkaline than a pH of 7.
Exactly, exactly.
And so when you say a 30% decrease or in the ocean's acidity, you're not talking about like 3 pH points. You're talking about literally 30% of the current ocean pH of say 8, with 8 being 100%. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, basically, our friends, the chemists, have two complex calculations to do, one for acidity and one for pH. And, I can do them, but it's a little bit of a juggling problem. But for the ordinary person, I don't think it makes any sense to do both of them. So I prefer to see acidity. That's the one that is more linear than the pH scale.
Okay, so a 30% drop as you showed from like 8.1 to 7.5. I don't remember the exact.
Well, we can go back at this, but basically, those are the stock numbers that go with those. So yeah, those numbers are correct.
Okay.
It's just that it's hard for someone who's not a chemist that uses that stuff all the time to follow it. Like I said, the acidity is much better. If you get more and more hydrogen in there, the acidity goes up, and it goes up linearly. Or if you get less and less hydrogen, the acidity goes down. That's something you can understand. Whereas if you have this thing of take a logarithm to the base 10, it's a little tough for the average bear.
Well, as someone who used to keep saltwater fish, I can tell you if the acidity goes down from 8.4 to say 7.5, you've got a bunch of dead fish. It's a disaster.
I remember learning about that when I was looking for a job somewhere in Alabama, and I walked around the grounds and I saw this crystal clear water there. And I thought, wow, this is the cleanest looking water I've ever seen in my life. Whoa, this is really great. And I complimented them on the water. They said, oh yeah, that's because our acidity is so high, nothing can live there.
Yeah. Dead lake. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. So we've covered a lot of stuff, folks. I hope it hasn't been, what do you call it, too much. But I think it gives you some idea that, my God, there is hope there. And a lot of this stuff is fairly easy to understand. You just basically, you're just keeping track of tons of carbon dioxide equivalent is what you're doing. And that the technologies are doing marvelous, much better than anything we ever imagined. There are secret things out there going on that we don't really understand how the Gulf Stream works. We don't really understand how methyl hydrates work and that sort of thing. But we're working on it, and hopefully nothing too bad happens as we learn. So thank you very much for all your attention, and I sure enjoyed interacting with you.
Well, thank you, Tom. And we really appreciate your time and your expertise and sharing the optimism that you have. And as always, NCCCA will plant a tree in your honor at one of the places that's burned here in the state. And you can look at the GPS coordinates and go find your tree. So
Oh, good. I'll have to go visit.
there you go. So this is compliments of our NCCCA for your wonderful sharing of information tonight. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Jim.
You're welcome.